the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the NFL wire site about the Arizona Cardinals from the USA Today family of sites. And my co-host is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, which is an SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site. Of course, he is also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. And we did it. The Cardinals played Thursday night. This is episode 378, and we get to talk about a win.
A home win.
Home win. Yes. They snapped their 8-game home losing streak to pick up the and if there's anything else, that win more than anything else, for me, it was like being able to breathe again. Because that Saints team was so decimated. It was a game the Cardinals needed to win and should have won and did win. But even optimistic self here was in a situation where I was scared. I was worried because if they lost that game after losing to Seattle, because the Seattle game was supposed to be the get-well game, then you play against New Orleans, and in that situation, you don't pick up a win, you're like, well, now what? That was my whole thing, is that I thought they would take care of business, but I was worried. But they did. They pick up a 42-34 victory on Thursday night in a game where they didn't play exceptionally well on either side of the ball overall, but it was a game of big plays, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Seth, let's talk about that game in this edition of the show, episode 378. We want to talk about, we'll take a little bit different this time in this show. Each of us will pick out 3 things that stood out in the win for us. We'll talk playing time. We'll talk about whether we thought the offense and defense actually played well. The trade deadline is in a week from today. Well, it's Tuesday night as we're recording, but a week from Tuesday, or this coming Tuesday for the rest of y'all after you've heard this, after you've heard the episode drop. That will be the next coming Tuesday is the trade deadline. Do the Cardinals have anyone we're trading? Is there anyone they should trade for? And then we will look ahead to Week 8 as they're on the road to take on the Minnesota Vikings. So, Seth, let's start with you. What are your 3 things that stood out most to you in the win on Thursday night?
You know, you can go a bunch of different ways with this, but the first thing I was going to go with is that even though they didn't start him, the duo of Cody Ford and Billy Price at left guard and center were definitely more effective than the duo of Sean Harlow and Max Garcia. And so that was, I think that was important and nice to see. Obviously, Ford's been on the injured list, so we've been waiting for him to get back. They activated him last week, and then I don't think they were planning on activating him for the Thursday night game. I mean, let's be honest, they're probably going to wait until the Minnesota game, and then Justin Pugh went down with the season-ending knee injury, and, best laid plans, right?
Yeah.
So,
I wondered how that was going to play out, and then have Max Garcia leave the game with the injury. You're like, oh boy, I hope he's ready, because he hadn't had a full practice yet. But Cliff did reveal on Monday that the plan the whole time was to work in both guys, was to alternate series and basically see how it went, who would they go with moving forward. And Max got hurt, so I guess they're moving forward with Cody Ford, but you feel much better about it. And especially they traded a draft pick for him. He's a guy who started in the league, who's been a starter, who, say what you will about Max Garcia. He played well and for a stretch last season for them. Versatile. But Cody Ford's definitely an upgrade on that. And I don't think he's a significant downgrade from Justin Pugh. Pugh was playing over the last couple of seasons. He might have been the most consistent. Might be the nearly. You might be the best lineman that they've had. Consistency. DJ played a little bit down last year from what he played the year before. Still made the Pro Bowl, but Pugh has been just very solid quietly, very effective for them, and it was sad to see him go. But to see Cody Ford step in, you're like, okay, you feel better about that left guard position moving forward, at least.
Yeah, and so you look at that. I thought that was nice to see. Obviously, it's important to get that continuity along the offensive line, but just to see them be able to come out, run the ball so effectively, right? Like that was almost easy running the ball in that game.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can say, well, the Saints defense isn't great. It's not. That's fine. But, neither was the Seahawks defense, and they really stuck it to the Cardinals. So, I thought that was really nice to see, that duo come in and kind of make an immediate impact, because clearly those two, along with Will Hernandez, are playing for jobs next year. And if you see that trio in there consistently and you're able to get, especially games like that, running the football, it's going to be hard not to bring everyone back.
Right. That's a really good point with that. What's your number 2 takeaway?
My number 2 takeaway was we finally saw big plays on defense. So one of the things that you and I have talked about quite a bit is that, like, the defense hasn't been playing poorly. They've been getting stops. They've been kind of bend but don't break. But they weren't making like game-changing plays, right? Like even the week before in Seattle, the special teams made the play to get the pump block for a touchdown. But the defense making game-changing plays. Like they were making big plays. It just didn't seem like they were doing things that could cause the Cardinals to win. They were seeing, so that's the little nuance, right? Like they were putting the Cardinals in a position to win, but they weren't doing things that caused the Cardinals to win games. And obviously that changed this last weekend on Thursday Night Football, when you just talk about the fact that, holy cow, 2 pick sixes in 4 plays?
Yeah, it reminded me, and I don't remember if they had the 2 picks, but it reminded me of that 2015 game that basically ruined Colin Kaepernick, when they just picked him in, and I remember the game because I got to that late. I walked into the press box when the first pick six happened, and that was honestly the decline of Colin Kaepernick in terms of play. And it is, I don't know if there is like that first, the Marco Wilson play, the breath and life it breathed into the stadium, the energy that had was palpable to me.
Well, it's just something, like I said, they haven't done it lately. And it makes it so difficult, because on both sides of the ball, let's be honest, it's just been waiting for a big to happen. Like, I think the biggest play of the season has been that Marquise Brown, 25-yard catch and run touchdown. Like, just in terms of like making something. And so to see 2 plays, like you said, like it's like, oh, maybe they're not a terrible team, right? And like you said, it kind of breathes that life into the stadium, into the the players, the fans. Like, all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, okay, maybe they're just not terrible, and like we just hadn't seen that. And so it was good to see, man. Like, it was good to see them make game-changing plays.
And what was your number 3?
My number 3 is, I love that you're starting to see snaps for the young guys. Cameron Thomas played 24 snaps. Victor Dimukeje started and played 32 snaps. Myjai Sanders played 6 snaps.
A part of that is Dennis Gardeck was injured, so
correct.
When he gets back, that will change a little bit. But yes, it still was. It was significant.
And then you also had Trey McBride on the other side. He played the most snaps of his career at 34. So like all of a sudden, you're like, oh, okay. Now they're starting to realize like, hey, we can also play younger guys, and I'm not one of those guys that's like just throw them to the wolves and like they got to play every snap. And I don't care about that, but like we've talked about McBride, so we can talk about the defensive players, right? Like they don't have any pass rush, like they haven't been generating pass rush, and so obviously you and I are not up for this. We are willing to say that hopefully the coaches are putting the best foot forward, but it couldn't be worse than no pass rush, could it? Like
right.
I think that's my big thing. And so to see, Cam Thomas played 24 snaps, 20 of them were pass rushes.
Right. When it's clearly, when and it's perfect a scenario like that, and that's kind of what we thought would be Cam Thomas' role this year, would be to put him in a clear pass rushing situation so that he doesn't have to think about 8 or 9 different outcomes for whatever assignment, peeling off, dropping into cover, which we've seen him do. But
yeah, he did it twice, and Myjai did it twice, but that's okay. Like if 90% of their snaps are pass rush snaps, yes, you do have to show at least one time that you're willing to do something different with them, but at least they're getting on there and being able to rush the passer. And I know they didn't have any sacks in the game, but just to see them getting more run is impressive to me.
For me, my number one takeaway is your number two takeaway is the defensive big plays. We talked about, as you mentioned, we've talked about that for the last few weeks, is the fact that while the defense has been solid, it hasn't been great because it hasn't been changing things. It's been if the offense had been playing well, then the defense would be fantastic. But in the absence of big plays offensively to get those game-changing plays, and then the first one was Marco Wilson. And that was a jolt of energy, the athleticism he showed, the fact that and I'm going to go first. I'm even not even the Marco Wilson one. Antonio Hamilton getting that end zone pick.
All right,
that was, oh my God, that I think started everything because the defense didn't look good during those first 2 drives. Andy Dalton just carved them up down the field on the first drive for the touchdown. Now the Cardinals did get the field goal, and then Dalton was carving them up again down the field. And you're like, oh, and that's the part where I was like, oh no, are we really going to see this? And then Hamilton makes that play in the end zone. You could say he didn't have he didn't make every play didn't look great, but he was like, if there's a reason why the coaches, you watch the way he plays, the coaches love. He got beat-ish. He was behind on a couple of plays throughout, but he is intense. He does remind me of maybe a slightly less fast Robert Alford in terms of how he approaches things. He plays with a chip on his shoulder to get that interception and turn that around to not only keep a field goal off, to keep it from being 14-3. It kept it from even being 10-3, and that changed the game for me, I think, early on. And then you add on top of that the Marco Wilson pick 6, being in the right place at the right time, and then but the one that was the wow play. Now, Marco's the exclamation point of his leaping into the end zone, the dive at the end zone, which showed off just the sheer athleticism that he has, was something else. But then the Isaiah Simmons interception, the pick six, was the icing on the cake, because that sort of showcased Isaiah Simmons as a game changer. We've seen him play much better, but the ceiling that he has, it's plays like that where he takes the one-handed interception and a dude at his side. I will say this. I remember this the first time I saw him in 2020 in training camp. He is an impressively large individual. You don't realize it until you see him next to other players. He was like Chandler Jones, big guy, 6'5", 60. Isaiah Simmons is nearly as big as he is. He's not as thick. He's not as broad because he's got a little, but he's a legit 6'4", 2, and the speed that he has. That play is on display the exact type of ceiling that you get. I'm sure what Steve Keim was like. It's those sort of legendary plays, because to take the ball from across midfield in all sorts of track and just outrun everybody was quite impressive. And so they got the game-changing plays after that. Let's be honest. In the second half, they didn't need to play defense, and the way they played defense showed. The way because they got 18 points ahead. The defense changed. They were like, okay,
no big plays. Yeah.
They stopped. They let them dink and dunk down the field. That was by design, but it made the things look bad. Those game-changing plays, like you said, that was my first takeaway. Number two, the explosiveness that they had on offense. It wasn't clean, but we saw explosiveness on offense, which we've been missing all year. This year, that's the part that's been the dangerous part of the offense. When they've been on, and they haven't been on much, they have been effective and able to move down the field, but we've been missing big plays. But you get, and I'd have to go back through, but they show the 10 longest for the Cardinals. They had 10 plays of at least 15 yards. You got the 45-yard play from Benjamin. Heck of a game from him. You got the Keontae Ingram 24-yard play. You had Rondale Moore, the 31-yarder. Well, heck, if you look at Kyler hits. So you have of this. So you've got Eno comes up on 1, 2, 3 of them. Hopkins is 1, 2, 3 of them, and so it was that the explosiveness came back, and I think that had to do with Hopkins' return. Because he's a difference maker by far, and his presence on the field made it so even if they were not super effective, they could have been much, much better offensively. But with him on the field, it adds an element that opens things up for things to happen. And the offense, rather than just being at best effective, was dangerous. And I loved seeing that.
Yeah, and it was just nice to see, like you said, the explosive plays down the field. And it's just, you can tell that Marquise wasn't super comfortable yet being the guy creating those plays. And so they were kind of still manufacturing touches for him to make sure that he was involved, but he wasn't ready to be the guy. And you can see the clear difference with DeAndre back. And so, like you said, it kind of opened up everything. So it was good to see overall, and like you said, just to actually see them look explosive.
And then for me, my third takeaway is winning at home. Holy cow. It is so long. So long. And honestly, I'm going to continue to be impressed by how worried, remember how worried we all were in week 1 about Zaven Collins?
Yeah, I mean, he's all of a sudden playing like the captain of a team, right?
It's amazing. It's like they've been working on it, and I swear the Cardinals don't know how to handle an off season, because they talked about it's like they created doubt in everybody's mind, because we were all planning on we all assumed that with Jordan Hicks leaving, that Zaven would be the play caller, Zaven this, Zaven that, he was going to do it, and we're waiting for it to happen. But then they talked about whatever role he might have, how he might not have the green dot. Jalen Thompson was doing it. Week 1, it was Isaiah Simmons. He was getting reps at it, but it's like, just like with the Kyler stuff in the offseason, it's like with everything, they were setting him up to look bad rather than building him up. It's like, yeah, we're looking at a lot of different options, but the plan is for Zaven Collins to call the defense and to get that. And then you see in week 1 how, and Simmons played a lot, and then Collins played some, but then they were bringing in, Nick Vigil and, Ben Neiman, and suddenly the last month he's playing every snap. He's calling the plays. He looks like a player out there. He's not perfect, but now you don't see him messing up anymore. Now he's making plays, and kind of last year the arc for Isaiah Simmons, last year he made a lot of plays, but he gave up a lot of plays. Now we might not be seeing as many big plays being made by Collins, but we're no longer seeing him giving them up. So he's been consistent, and he flashes a few times, which is, that's exactly what you want to see. And so that's it's fantastic.
Right, and he's just starting it to feel like he's blossoming into a good player, and that's obviously key for this team moving forward, for him just to be a guy that plays at a high level. And maybe he's never Bobby Wagner,
but let's be honest. Let's at least he can be prime Jordan Hicks,
right? Or even higher level than that. But yeah, to your point, like he can be something high level, as opposed. It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be Hall of Fame,
right? 7-time All-Pro, Hall of Fame. But if you get a guy that is the middle of your defense, and
as reliable, as he might not be the same type of player, but Carlos Dansby level, who great, he thinks
correct,
he should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's never made a Pro Bowl, but really, really good player.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable expectation and outcome to want.
Yeah. And so, lots to like in that game. But coming up next on the Rise Up Secret podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web, let's move on and talk about some playing time, because we saw a few things shaken up. That's coming next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. And the Cardinals made a few minor changes. I think the one big surprise that we saw, and that was the that's what they're doing. As much talk as I've given about Sean Harwell, they quietly signed Billy Price, and then within a couple of weeks, he was in the starting lineup. So that was the first thing that we saw. Billy Price replaced Sean Harlow as the backup center, starting in place of Rodney Hudson, who is still dealing with the knee injury. And now on the depth chart, it reflected that this week. That was released for Week 8. It is now officially Billy Price, who is the number 2 center behind Rodney Hudson. And let's be honest, that should be no surprise. Price was a high-end talent coming out of college. A guy, let's be honest, if I recall, he's a can't-miss, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, I think, a first-round pick, wasn't he?
He was a first-round pick, but didn't we think that kind of the talk that was coming, he was really highly touted, like when the Bengals drafted, like that's a great pick.
Right, and he was a guy that felt like, yeah, you were getting again, maybe you're not getting Travis Frederick, right, or Jason Kelsey, but you're getting a guy like maybe a Rodney Hudson level that goes to a Pro Bowl here or there, and is kind of the anchor of your offensive line for 6 to 8 years. And instead, he just became a guy that couldn't stay on the field, a guy that was overwhelmed athletically, and it just, became an issue. But sometimes, I mean, we see these guys, especially along the already in time.
Or to be in the right situation.
Well, and that's part of it too, 1000%. But like a lot of it becomes, like we talked about a little bit with Zaven, right? Like, or with all the rookies. Everybody wants to see them start immediately. Like, hey, they got to get going. They got to get out there. They got to get playing. And the reality is they don't. They don't. And some of them aren't ready. And it's harder for a team to be like, he's not ready, we need him to wait a year, than it is to, immediately put him out there and then have to eat it when he's not good.
Yeah. And so we saw that. And Sean Harlow, he's had good games, he's had bad games. He himself was a 4th round pick for Atlanta back in 2017. But there is a stark difference, and we saw this. It started last year. The Cardinals philosophically changed their plan at center, because pretty much everyone they had drafted or brought in to play center was on the more athletic, undersized guy. If we go back to Mason Cole, I can't remember the guy. I'm drawing a blank of the kid that they drafted before him out of Missouri.
Evan Boehm.
Yeah, Evan Boehm. And from there, Lyle Sendline, who was a undrafted guy or late round guy but forever they were going with guys who were overperforming basically their status, more or less. And then you go with Hudson. They prioritize the center position and changed the physical profile. They wanted someone big. And Hudson's big, and they moved Max Garcia to be their primary backup setter last year, he's a big guy. And now they add Billy Price, again, a big guy. Sean Harlow is a little bit bigger than a tight end.
Right.
And so
right.
you get someone who's a legitimate center with that size, and you feel a little bit better about the backup center position now, especially if that knee for Hudson is going to be a problem for the rest of the year.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is I think one of the things they did poorly the last couple of years, and I commend Keim and company for trying to rectify it, was they were putting their eggs in a lot of veteran player baskets that hadn't stayed healthy. And so you saw, oh yeah, we're developing Josh Jones, but there's no guards. So they brought in 2 guards this year, and of course one gets hurt immediately, because why not? But and so it seems like now there's a more concerted effort to make sure that they're doing that they're developing talent while they are bringing in outside talent as well. Or in this case now, hey, we don't have to, what we just talked about, right? We don't have to play the young guys immediately. We can still develop them and bring in a veteran to take over, and that's just what haven't seen really, right?
Right. And now the second biggest takeaway was the disappearance of AJ Green. Not just he got Andy Isabella, not quite Andy Isabella. He was active, but he did not make it. This is the very first time in his entire career, dating back to 2011, when he was a top 5 pick, that he was active and dressed for a game and did not log a single snap. That is, if you think about the type of career that AJ Green has had, the caliber of player that is unheard of. He was he wasn't even a healthy scratch, inactive for whatever. They dressed him, and he played. He got the backup quarterback thing. He didn't play. Didn't play at all, not a single snap. And it's very interesting to kind of hear what they had to say about it after the game. Cliff, it felt to me when he talked about it after the game, and even the day after, it felt like his eulogy for AJ Green's career, that basically he'd fallen completely out of the rotation. Rondell, Hollywood, Dortch, who got the playing time in place. Then the addition of Robbie Anderson. And then they seemed to walk back a little bit Monday between Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury, that they're going to try and do matchups. Basically not completely dismissing it, but leaving the door open for him to be able to play. And we knew entering this year that they wanted to play him less because he did wear down over the course of last year. But you got to be honest, the production that he's had, 10 catches for 56 yards, it's been disappointing. I expected him in year 2 to be much better.
Especially with the drops that you add in. Like, he just doesn't look as physically comfortable. And a lot of people made fun of him last year.
He didn't look good, but he was productive. Like, that first half of the season had a solid production, but you're like, does he look good? And Cliff even last year was like, he's a big AJ Green fan. He's no longer an AJ Green fan.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, man. And it's, and it comes in every player's life. And, you hope for AJ Green's sake, he gets to go out on a better note, right?
Yeah.
But you hope it doesn't come at the cost of the Cardinals, putting him in a position and him not being able to make a play again either.
Yeah, but they've clearly kind of moved. So Rondell played more of the Z. Greg Dortch got much more playing time. He basically disappeared. Now, it's not like he produced much, but you got Hopkins, Moore, and Dortch. You get Robbie Anderson mixed into there. And then when you get Hollywood back, yeah, it does make it really hard for Green to play. That said, we'll see what happens moving forward. I don't think that they're going to give him the Terrell Suggs treatment and let him then cut him unless he asks for it, because ultimately with depth and injuries they still might need him down the stretch.
Correct. And you never know what's going to happen. And, they've had injuries with Wesley, obviously, this year. And then Rondell Moore's been injured off and on the last 2 years. So it's just one of those situations where you have to, unless he flat out requested or his agent requested, like, everybody's kind of got to be on the same page with it. And I know he's not going to be happy. His agent's not going to be happy, but they also have to see what's going on, right?
Yeah. And from all we've ever seen is he's happy here. Like, I don't know if that'll change, but he likes it here. He likes the teammates he's got. He likes the system. And maybe he's come to grips where he's at physically in his career. The other thing that we saw was Antonio Hamilton's role increased again, which is good to see. He made plays. We see, you mentioned earlier, was the increased role of the young players, and an increased role as the backup running back for Keontae Ingram, and he made some plays too. That was nice to see. Eno had a fantastic game. There's not much to say about the playing time there because James Conner was out, and so he actually got a significant role. And he looked good, but people are like, he looks like flashing back to the offseason when Cliff said that he looked like he could be a starting running back. Proved he could be a starting running back, but remember, that's it. It reminded me of he looks really good in the Chase Edmonds role, which is what I always felt would be the perfect role for him.
Yeah, and you expect to see it kind of flourish and grow, but then they've had the issue where, Connor hasn't been healthy or they haven't been able to utilize both backs consistently, and so for him to get a chance to be a lead role guy and make plays was big, and it's just always fun to see guys have success, right?
Yeah. Well, and he's an ASU guy. So there's an extra. He already has a cachet of love from the fans. Sometimes irrationally so. 7th round pick. They should have been drafted in the 3rd round. He's finally blossoming. It's great to see. He's fun to watch. Like, what you love to see is also you like to see how he runs with the ball as well. You get he plays hungry, which you love to see. Fans love to see that, especially a guy he's not the biggest. Like, I wouldn't say 5'9", 205 is small.
No, but it's not,
because there's lots of running backs his size. But he's not big. And he was making some big guy. He was running like with the same sort of hunger that big guys run.
Yeah, and it was fun to see, and he's been fun to watch develop.
It's got to be fun. Steve Keim's got to think that this is one of his wins because, based on from like Mike Jurek, he says like this is that the offensive staff wasn't thrilled that he was on the roster as a rookie. They didn't think he deserved to be there. Cliff has even said he didn't think he'd make it. And if you listen and go back to things that Cliff has said, it was never about talent. He did Eno was bad at preparation. He did not make the right transition to the pros in terms of practice habits and mentality and study habit. And so whether it was for whatever reason, he had to learn, and he's made the adjustments, and now is getting a real opportunity. And it's going to be fun to see because he's exactly the type of player you want to see flourish. Maybe stick around for another contract. He probably won't be in a position to, because he's not the starter. But you get him in a nice little role, and you. But
it'd be one of those contracts like you said, where you're like, hey, here's 2 years, $4 or $5 million.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be a 3 years $17 million deal or 3 years $21 million deal. And that's the thing too, is you can't get mad if he gets something like that.
Right.
But,
right.
But if you lock him up a little ahead of time, and you're like, hey, here's a 2 year $5 extension, and next year because I think it's after year 3 for those guys, isn't it?
Yeah.
So maybe, but it's always good to have running backs, and everybody knows my opinion of running backs, and you use them and lose them until I know everybody loves Christian McCaffrey, and maybe he ends up being the guy that gets the 49ers over the top. But I have a really good friend that's a 49ers fan, and we were talking about it on Thursday at his son's high school football game. And we were talking, he was like, it's not even the cost for McCaffrey at this point. It's the fact that they've spent 2 or 3 third-round picks in the last couple of years on running backs as well.
Right.
And so now yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
And the fact that they get production from running backs no matter what.
Right.
And so are they going to get that much higher production from McCaffrey? And then you have to think, the one thing that 49ers running backs always tend to have an issue with is durability. They get a guy who can produce and gets hurt, and McCaffrey has had durability issues the past couple of seasons. So how much of a difference is he going to make offensively? Obviously, more talent means better team, which is better chance to win every single time. So if you have the opportunity to do that, you do it. But at the same time, at what cost? Because is his production going to transcend that of, say, Jeff Wilson's, who was getting 120 yards a game sometimes? How much higher a ceiling is McCaffrey going to give you in a game?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is when you look at it, everybody's got a difference of opinion things. And, you and I went back and forth on for instance, on the James Conner thing. I don't know if either of us were like, they absolutely have to sign him. If they don't sign him, it's the biggest mistake ever. But we were both also like, oh, if they sign him, that's fine. I mean, it would be a good signing. It's not like it would be negligent unless it was something out of this world from a cost perspective, right? But it just seems like at times that you're able to find running backs that can produce. So you have to continue to kind of go to that well, and it's where do you go to it? And I like the idea of going in the 5th, 6th, 7th round consistently, and then seeing what you get out of those guys.
Yeah. Hamilton's increase in playing time, I think, expected, but now the question that comes up for me now is if he's going to get significantly more time, then and they use 3 corners, what's Isaiah's role going to be? Because Isaiah Simmons, because what we've seen mostly out of him is playing in the slot. So that's going to be interesting to see moving forward. Is can keep him on the field while playing 3 cornerback. If we're going to see more linebacker Isaiah Simmons, or if they're going to still lean on guys like Neiman and Tanner Vallejo. That's the one thing I'm going to be interested in watching.
But see, I'm okay with using Simmons. Obviously, I'd like to see him play, and I think, what was he at? Like 54 out of 72 snaps. So
yeah, not bad at all.
You'd like to see him another, 8 snaps. So 62, 60 to 62 out of 72. So we're right around the 85% mark. You're fine with that. So that's a little bit, I mean, and we're nitpicking, let's be honest, but like that's a little bit lower than you want to see, but like I'm okay with it because he's still the 2nd most used linebacker.
Yeah.
If guys like Neiman and Vigil are out snapping him, that's where I start to have an issue.
Makes sense. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the Mr. Cardinals talk a little. Let's talk about the offense and the defense. There were plays that were made. How much better did they play as a unit overall? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Sea Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the offense and the defense. We talked about our biggest takeaways. We talked about playing time. Now, the offense was better. I mean, you say we think that the offense was better, but if you look at some of the metrics, only 326 total yards, 5.4 yards per play. They were 3 of 10 again on 3rd down. So if you're looking out, now, obviously the rushing, they were able to run the ball, which was good, 137 rushing yards. Then you look at the game, it was, didn't get a lot of variety in the passing game. It was only 20 completions. Half the completions went to DeAndre Hopkins. He basically outperformed all the other pass catches combined. So if you talk about offensively, we saw more explosiveness. But if you look at overall, did the offense play well? I'm with what Cliff said, and it's nowhere near what they expect.
No, it's not, but it was efficient for the first time. And I think that was the big thing, is like you saw explosive plays, you saw long drive, you saw consistent, or you saw back-to-back drives, something we hadn't seen. And then from there, that's kind of where it grows into being consistent. But it's been an odd NFL year in general, offensively, outside of KC and Buffalo. You're not really seeing consistent offenses every week. Like even the week where the only undefeated team, Philadelphia, played the Cardinals, it wasn't like their offense was what everybody said. It ended up being a lot of time-consuming, short passes, quarterback runs type of stuff. Like it wasn't like they were making big plays. And I just think there's a lot of things missing in a lot of NFL teams. And obviously, because we are Cardinals fans, we tend to just only see that. But when you look at it overall, I mean, they're middle of the pack in almost every category. And I mean, whether or not it's a good thing, they haven't had their best player in DeAndre Hopkins. And maybe that's an issue in that he's still their best player. And maybe that's, on Kyler of like he's not playing as well as they need him to this year. But at the same time, I don't know if it's a bad thing necessarily either. I mean, I'm not comparing the entire situation, but I mean, Aaron Rodgers doesn't look great without Devontae Adams all of a sudden, right?
Yeah, kind of. I've said the last couple of years, when you look at Josh Allen and Joe Burrow's play, the difference for them has been take Stephon Diggs off that team, and what was Josh Allen? What did Joey Burrow look like before Jamar Chase? They still had talent and there was upside, but they were different quarterbacks. And so take Andre away from him, and he looks different. There were some really good things about the offense. Now, they didn't finish, and that part of that is issues on third down again, but they started off the game with 3 consecutive scoring drives. Wow, 3 consecutive scoring drives. The issue for me was that the consistency. They went 3 and out their first 2 drives of the second half, which you hate to see, especially when you could have. Now, they ended up with 42 points. We have to remember that two of those touchdowns came from the defense, and we would like to see is the offense to be able to produce, especially when you get 3 scoring drives to set the game offensively, is to then have your offense itself be able to account for a whole bunch of points. Now, granted, what I liked about it is that after the 3 and out, after New Orleans scored, they responded twice in the second half. And one 12-play drive. They had a 12-play drive. They had a 13-play drive. They had a 9-play drive. They had an 8-play drive in their scoring plays. And so those were good to see, but yeah, we're still in a situation where they're not quite there. And you wish they were nearly halfway through the season, and now you get DeAndre back. In the next couple of games, you finally see it. We need to wait. This is an offensive unit that's supposed to be the strength of the team. We haven't seen a complete game from this offense yet.
No, and that's been the biggest issue is they haven't put together a full game. They haven't put together. I mean, it doesn't feel like they put together a full half yet, right? And so that's what it comes down to is like finding a game where they can be consistent for the entire game. That's why I said they were efficient in a lot of ways because they made plays when they needed to, but it wasn't like they were consistently making big plays. So that'll be what's interesting to kind of watch move forward to see how that plays out because that's kind of the next step in everything.
Yeah. Defensively, they obviously made the game-changing plays, but they had more mistakes. If you look at the 53-yard touchdown catch by Rashid Shaheed, the 64-yard pass play to Kevin White. Chris Olave had a very productive day. The Cardinals had not been giving up large predictive days to receivers in previous weeks. Andy Dalton carved them up for 361 yards and 4 touchdowns, but he threw 3 interceptions. They gave up more yards to the Saints than the Chiefs in Week 1, but it's not just looking at the box score. So there were things not to like. They didn't get a sack, but I will say once they got an 18-point lead, they stopped trying. Like they stopped attacking defensively, and they said we are going passive. You might not like that or not, but the idea was to make them
long drives.
Yes, it was
that was
3. They had a 3 lead. You're like, okay, we can. It wasn't necessarily coasting, but it definitely changed philosophically what they're going to do, which led to nearly 50% on third down allowed, 494 total yards. But when you're playing from that far ahead, defensively, you are now able to, especially against a shorthanded team. Okay, try and beat us. You're going to run out of time no matter what.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, I think that was, they didn't get greedy when you don't do that, sometimes you play, like you said, a little too conservative on both sides of the ball, and then teams are able to take advantage or rack up yards and things like that. I mean, it goes back to some of the stuff we've seen from the Cardinals in the first 6 games offensively, where they get behind and then all of a sudden you look and Kyler has 48 completions for 250 260 yards, and you're like, oh. And you're like, well, I didn't think he played that well. But sometimes it's simply because they're allowing it to happen, right?
Right. And so I want to see, coming this week, I want to see, I mean, if the Cardinals have a 3-score lead against the Vikings, well, then fine. I guess I'll be fine with how the defensive numbers looked. But yeah, that's basically, I think that in many ways that actually early on the defense was not as good as it's been in past, but at the same time they had
more opportunistic.
Yeah, they were more opportunistic, which is more game changing. So they while they did not play as well schematically, they had a bigger impact on the game with the 3 turnovers in the first half. That changed that basically changed the game, because at the beginning of the game you're like, those 2 pick sixes, the game was over. The game was over after that.
Well, and that's just it. Like I wrote, or I talked about it the other day, because somebody was saying the same thing, like, and they were like, oh, they're just lucky they were playing Andy Dalton and blah blah blah. And I'm like, man, coming into this game, the Saints under Andy Dalton were averaging 31 points per game and had 1 interception. And coming into this game, the Cardinals in 5 games have 19.6 points per game. In the other 2 games, the Chiefs and the Saints, it's like 38. So yes, I mean, obviously when they give up a lot of points, it looks bad. But
they also, that the defensively, and I think it was also about how the control of the game, the Saints had been rolling in the running game.
Right. And so that's the thing, is like, you can look at it and say, did the defense, play well? The answer can be no, or it can be like they made plays when they had to, and then, they gave up some cheap ones late. Like, it's not like, and it's not like they were ever in danger in the second half of that game.
No, because the second that there was any sort of threat, they responded.
Right.
Which was good to see. Coming next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best Cardinals Talk of the Bed. We're hitting the trade deadline soon. Let's talk about trades. Do the Cardinals have anyone worth moving? Should they move to make any other additions? That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. Trade deadline coming up next week on Tuesday. The Cardinals already have made one move, obviously, where they acquired Robbie Anderson. That's in addition to the 2 trades they made before the season, acquiring Trayvon Mullen and Cody Ford. The Robbie Anderson trade, I think, will be nice, especially considering he probably takes over for A.J. Green. But with that, teams will be making moves. Is there anyone out there that would be worth the Cardinals' time? I think offensively, I don't think they need to, offense, stop. They don't need to do anything on offense. But if we look at kind of the needs defensively, we can sort of, you can probably look at 3 areas that have been the question marks entering this year. It's when it was a cornerback, it was going to be the edge, and it was going to be in the defensive interior. Is cornerback a position we need to even think about anymore?
No, I mean, it's one of those situations you can never have enough cornerbacks, so you can always add a corner. It's not a big deal. I know they want to get Trayvon Mullen back, and they'll feel like they've got the best depth they've probably had in a long time. You feel
like 4 cornerbacks that you would be completely comfortable playing.
And so that's the thing, is like, obviously we've talked about corner before, man. It's really tough to find corners, and it's really tough to trade for corners. So that's the thing, is like, yeah, if you get a chance to upgrade a corner, sure, you'd get to get, but like, 1, that usually doesn't happen, and 2, again, I don't think that there's a guarantee that you're going to get anything more than another Antonio Hamilton or Trayvon Mullen level player.
Right.
So I think it comes down to two positions. I think you're looking at edge rusher, and I think you're looking at defensive line. And so, we've talked about it a little bit. One, Rashard Lawrence, poor guy, like just can't stay healthy. Do we have any update on what happened to him yet?
It was his shoulder, and that's about it. So we'll probably know more. Cliff didn't talk about it on Monday. He did mention on Friday that it was a shoulder, but he looked like he was in a lot of pain.
So, you got that. We talked about the JJ situation. Like, he's playing fine, he's playing well, but the reality becomes he's still 32, 33, and he's still their best or second best defensive lineman. So you probably need to have something behind him that you're a little more comfortable with. I don't know what that means. I don't know if you can go get one of the guys from Washington. They have Deron Payne and John Allen, right? I would assume Payne's probably the one that's up for grabs, but I'm not sure.
That's the report that's out, that he could be on the move. Edge guys, there's two high-end names. Bradley Chubb, that's a possibility. And then you go to Carolina, Brian Burns, he seems to be more untouchable. But if it's not one of those two guys, that would be a big move. That would be like a Von Miller trade last year for the Rams. If it's not one of those two, is there an edge rusher that could come available that would be worth adding to the squad? Would a Jerry Hughes be worth it?
No, I don't think so. And here's why. Because I think all it's going to do is take reps from the young guys, and unless it's a guaranteed upgrade, which is like a Bradley Chubb level player, then there's no reason to do it now. If an injury comes into play, that's different. But if you're just looking to find a guy that like complements or upgrades your pass rushing, you probably need to get a guy that does so, right? And Hughes is probably more of a guy that you're looking at that's like going to play those 14 to 20 snaps. And is he going to be better than Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders? I mean, I'm asking because like he's good, but I don't know if he's going to definitely be better. So, I mean, that's the thing with Hughes, right? You look at it. So the last time Hughes had over 4.5 sacks was 2018. And he's been playing every game, almost every year. I mean, 2019 at age 31, he played 16 games, 4.5 sacks. 2020, 15 games at age 32, 4.5 sacks. Last year at 33, played 17 games, 2 sacks. Now he does have 4 sacks this year for Houston, but you go and look at the games, right? He had 2 sacks in the first game against Indy, who are not good. And then he had 2 sacks against Chicago, who is not good. And then in the other games, he's not really producing. And then his last game against the Raiders, he didn't even really do anything. And so that's kind of my only thing about a Jerry Hughes type. But like we said, if we're talking about a Bradley Chubb, I think even if you had Chandler Jones still, you go get a Bradley Chubb. Like,
yeah,
totally. You go get a pass rusher.
Yeah, totally. Because, and especially Vance Joseph's already coached him. He knows how to use him. He knows how to get success out of him. He's that good a player. And, he's the type of guy, especially because that's one of those home run type trades, like trading for Chandler Jones, trading for DeAndre Hopkins. That's one of those things you know is going to be a home run. It's just a matter of you trade for him, you extend him, and then you watch him thrive.
Well, and that's the thing is you look at it like, I mean, obviously we don't know for sure, but at the same time, you read around the web and the cost for him is like going to be like a 2 and a 3. So like that's infinitely doable. And you may be able to say like, hey, we'll do a 2 this year, 23, and a 3 in 24. And if they say no, we want them both in the same year, then maybe you weigh your options. But I still would think about, I still think it would make sense, because again, he's a guy that is a clear upgrade and a clear kind of high level player. I mean, you look at this year, he's got 5.5 sacks already. So
yeah, he's on pace to have his best season yet.
And then, like we said with Deron Payne, obviously a different position, but similar in the sense that he would bring a physicality to the team that the Cardinals just lack right now. He's not a pass rusher, so to speak, but he's a guy that would be really physical in the middle, and he's a guy that plays 80% of the snaps. So all of a sudden you've got a rotation of Allen, Payne, and Watt, and they're all playing, between 70 and 80% of the snaps. Now all of a sudden you don't need as much from Michael Dogby and Lecky Fotu and those and Ledbetter,
and who are fine, but they're not being impact players.
Correct.
Yeah, that if you can viably add somebody in the interior, if you can find a big time a significant increased improvement on the pass rush, I think those are game changing type things. I don't think we need to touch. I think offensively don't need to touch anything, and then those are the really because you like what you got a linebacker now. And you like what you got a cornerback really right now, and since Byron's playing like a number one, so you don't need another number one, right? And that's a number one is going to be too costly anyways. Now, so the next question is: in the Cardinals have given up some draft capital for this next year. Is there anyone that makes sense to move, and that would have any value at all? I highlighted 3 players in an article I wrote on Tuesday, and you could say even a 4th player has the possibility. But even then, it's not like they are. They're not going to get you much. We're going to say no. AJ Green, the guys I named AJ Green, Rondell Moore, Kelvin Beachum, and then maybe you could even throw into there Darrell Williams. AJ Green. He's played his way out of his rotation, but who wants a washed up AJ Green? Is there a team out there that? Do you think there's maybe a team who could use someone like? Could the Packers use a guy like AJ Green and think that he still has something, and maybe a better, a different scenario would make a difference for him?
No, but I mean it's tough because. You and I talked about this off the air. I mean, Rondell Moore, obviously Marquise Brown is injured right now, and DeAndre Hopkins, all in the last year, have dealt with elongated missed time due to injury, right? Antoine Wesley's already gone. So I know they like Greg Dortch, and Greg Dortch is a guy that fits, but like, Green's the only size guy unless they think that Laquan Treadwell's better.
Whom they just cut from the practice squad on Tuesday.
So there you go. So no, they don't think Laquan Treadwell's better. so that's the thing. So
and they got Robbie Anderson now, so you've got that.
That's true, and I agree with that. But I mean, Robbie Anderson and AJ Green and Greg Dortch, God forbid, is still better than Robbie Anderson, Greg Dortch, and Laquan Treadwell. Right. So that's how you have to look at it. And that's the thing is, like you said, does Green have value?
I don't think so. Like he's a guy that, and in theory, makes sense that you could move and get one of those day 3 picks that you already gave up.
But that's the other thing is, man, you look at it like, I don't think you're going to. So yeah, you get a 6 and 24 back. Like, okay. And like you and I talked about off the air, unless he's like, I want to go, then there's really no reason. Like yes, he looks like he's at the end of his career, but at the same time, again, if it comes up and you need somebody he's a guy that at least fits and knows what's going on
Right.
from day one. Because that's the thing is like, yeah, is Robbie Anderson right now a better player than AJ Green? I don't think many people would debate that, but Robbie Anderson needs 2 or 3 weeks. If, God forbid, DeAndre Hopkins and Rondale Moore were out, AJ Green would have played, but they just, they were able to use, let's be honest. I know we knew that DeAndre wasn't going to be on a pitch count, but like, did we see 94% of the snaps in game one?
I mean,
like we were like, oh, okay, I guess he's back, baby.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And that's the thing. He takes such good care of himself, and that's all it is. So no, I just don't think you can trade him. You look at like a JJ Watt, right? Like, all right, so Watt still has some value around the league. I don't know if that's going to be a cap hit thing at all. So let's just play the non-cap hit games right now. Watt might get you like a 4th rounder, maybe.
But he's still one of the 3 most important defensive players on the team.
Right. He's probably still your 1st or 2nd best front 4 or 5 guy. Right. So like you can't trade him. So he still has more value to the Cardinals than whatever contender you would trade him to.
Right.
And then you look at a guy like, and you can't trade him because of his cap hit, but like you look at a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, he's probably the only one that would have like adequate value back.
I think Rondale Moore might. But that's only, again, that you're counting on Greg Dortch to be the guy behind him.
But are you getting higher than a 3rd round pick for him?
Not likely.
So like Hopkins, you probably are getting a 2. Like I don't think you could get a 1 for Hopkins unless it's like Tampa Bay and they're like, hey, this is it. Like we're just going for it, right? And again, you can't trade him from a cap standpoint. Like it just
doesn't work.
It just doesn't work. But so that's the thing is like you and I were talking off the air. I think the guy Moore and Josh Jones are the 2 guys that have like the highest value around the league. And the Josh Jones one's odd because he doesn't even play for the Cardinals. But like when you have young athletic talent at offense tackle, I bet you could get like an early day 3 pick for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
But would you want to?
No, absolutely. That would make no sense. Trading Kelvin Beachum makes sense because then you can put Josh Jones in the lineup, who I think they already believe that he's ready to be a starter, but they rely on Beachum more. And if you traded Beachum, you'd get a day 3 pick maybe, and now you have no tackle depth. So
right, and so that's the thing is like. One of the things that we've talked about from their end is they're so shallow. So like we talked about, like when you're trading for Cody Ford, you're not trading for a starter, you were trading for depth. And now that depth is playing. So like, yeah, maybe you can go trade for another offensive lineman, right? But like, that's what you're looking for. The only impact position I see is along the front 4 or 5, however you want to look at it with what their defense is. Like you need somebody young and athletic on that front line to pair with Watt and Allen, who have been very good this year. But that gives you a little more juice as a pass rusher, maybe. And that's the thing. So like you look at Deron Payne, we talked about him, and then obviously Bradley Chubb. I think those are the 2 best guys out there. And if you can give up a 2 for one of them, you do it, I think. But absolutely. Outside of that, I don't know if there's anybody worth trading on either side for the Cardinals.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on. Get ready for the Cardinals game against the Vikings. Let's preview Minnesota. Coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals take on the Minnesota Vikings this weekend. They are on the road, and they face a 5-1 Vikings team leading the NFC North. New head coach. They still kind of have the same offensive look for them. You've got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. You've got Dalvin Cook and Kirk Cousins. But do we really think, like, we look at this Vikings team and they still look like a very beatable team, don't they?
Yeah, the Vikings have been a really interesting team this year, man, because like you look at them, you look at what they're doing, they're just above the Cardinals offensively, 13th offensively in points for. Their defense is playing better. They're 19.7. They're 12th in points against, right? But then you kind of go down to the brass tacks of things, right? And they give up a lot of passing yards. Don't give up a lot of passing touchdowns. They don't run the ball considerably well. But what they do is they create 10 turnovers this season, which is, or sorry, they more than that, but they've are 14% of drives defensively, which is 10th in the league. They do a really good job of playing from ahead, and kind of like what the Cardinals did at times last year, right?
Yeah.
But you look at their games, this season.
None of their games is impressive at this point. Beat the Packers.
Right. And that was their best game where you look at it 23-7. They looked, you were like, oh, this is a pretty decent team. But then from there, like you said, they go back and lose to Philly, then 24-7. And then everything's been a one-score game after that week.
Lions, Saints, Bears, and Dolphins, but that was the Dolphins with,
Skylar Thompson, and he couldn't even throw.
And so their last 4 wins in a row are against teams that you're like, yeah, it's a win, but they weren't impressive wins against, as in meh. They're very meh teams overall. And you could say that the Dolphins with Skylar Thompson, they were a train wreck at that point.
Yeah. And you look at it, they're led by Justin Jefferson. He's just otherworldly at this point. He's got over 600 yards receiving in 6 games, but he only has 2 touchdowns. Dalvin Cook's got 450 yards rushing. They don't run the ball a ton, which is just odd with Dalvin Cook, but he's kind of nicked up at times too. Kirk Cousins has been okay this year. He's playing at the same level as Kyler, which is ironic because when you look at it, their stats are similar, but Cousins is somehow 5-1, right? And so that's interesting to look at. Defensively, Zadarius Smith is continuing to play well. He's got 5.5 sacks, a guy you and I both liked.
Yeah.
Would have signed over the last couple of seasons, and it just never happened. He's got 5.5 sacks on the season. He's been playing well. Daniel Hunter's been okay, but outside of that, like it's really been their ability to force turnovers. Harrison Smith has 2 interceptions. Jordan Smith has 1. Patrick Peterson has 1.
Jordan Hicks is having a nice season.
Yeah, he's having a decent season, and then they've forced a lot of fumbles on the season as well. So they're aggressive. They're kind of ball hockey, if you will. They try to make plays on the ball and try to do those things, but they're a 5-1 team that you're like, they're not great in anything they do, but they're decent to good at everything.
Which is a change over the past couple of years, where they had clear defensive deficiencies. Hicks is playing very well in the middle, playing some of his best ball in the last 2 or 3 years. But yeah, the matchups that you like to see, you want to see how they handle Justin Jefferson, especially with Patrick Peterson. How are they going to be able to limit the passing game at all? And then, obviously, it'll come down to protecting the football. If what Minnesota's great success has been in getting takeaways, and they've gotten at least 1 takeaway in every single game this season. They have 3 games. They have 3 games with multiple takeaways. If you can do that, and if you look at so they have allowed a lot of passing yards, but if you're playing from ahead, you're going to do that. But they've allowed over 400 yards 3 different times.
including to Skylar Thompson.
Yes, yes. They allowed the Lions to rush for nearly 140, the Eagles for 163. Now their rush defense against the Dolphins, the Bears, they held them to less than 80 each week. They're a sound team, and I think like their defensive numbers probably are more to do with their offensive efficiency. Because if you look at now last week, and I guess it was just probably because they didn't need to, and they got the turnovers. They only had 234 yards of offense against the Dolphins this last week. Yeah, and so they haven't been picking the passing game this year. They've had 2 games this year of under 300 yard offense, and so yeah. The question for me is, can the Cardinals have a consecutive decent performance? Because they got against the Raiders, and then they couldn't put a full game together against the Rams. Then they beat Carolina, and then the Eagles, and then the Seahawks, and now they're not getting winning streaks. And can they play decently for a second week in a row? And this is a game, and if the importance of the game is that looking over, I believe that if you're looking at this next 4-game stretch, the following 3 after Minnesota are all division games, that the Cardinals need to legitimately to build any sort of momentum. Now, the NFC is not that great right now, so they could get it together later, but for the purposes of what we want to have the season feeling like, I think they need to win 3 of the next 4, and I think that starts with Minnesota, because do we really think that they're going to sweep their 3 division games over the next 4 weeks? I don't want to put them in a position to feel that they have to.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. But you look at it, I mean, they've got a tough stretch coming up anyways, where, they've got to show that they're a team that can compete. And if it starts this week, right? They did what they needed to on Thursday Night Football. They got 10 days to get a little healthier.
Vikings are coming off their bye week, so the Vikings had extra preparation too.
And so now it comes down to, is this a team that can, like you said, can rally? This next stretch of 5 games where they play, Minnesota, home against Seattle, at LA, versus San Francisco, and then versus the Chargers. This next 5 games, they have to go a minimum of 3-2 and be at 6-6, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But every game needs to be looked at, and I know it's cliche and I know whatever, but like everything needs to be looked at through the lens of, hey, let's just go 1-0 this week. Yes. Let's go 1-0 and see how that works out. And can you start to, as you've asked, can you start to stack consecutive good games together? Because even in that Philly game, which wasn't terrible, they couldn't continually put good games together. Carolina, they had basically 2.5 quarters, and Philly, they had basically 2.5 quarters. So it wasn't 2 good games. It wasn't 8 quarters of good football. It was about 5 quarters of good football. Can they put, and like we said, even New Orleans wasn't 4 quarters of good football, but maybe it was 3. So now can you put 4 together, or at least 3 that gives you a win? So, in back-to-back games, you're at 6 of 8 instead of 5 of 8. And now you're like, oh, now they lost again because they started slower. They, had a letdown to start the second half type of thing.
Yeah, and so, yeah. Do I think that the Cardinals can do it? I'd like to believe that win starts things. That the success offensively, getting DeAndre back, the big plays on defense is the beginning of something positive, because I've always been of the opinion that this is a talented Cardinals team. This is more or less the team that won 11 games last year. And so it shouldn't be this hard. This was a game, personally, I had them losing. Like when I put together my game-by-game projections. This is a game I had them losing, but I also had them playing better to start the year. And so, defensively, they should be able to limit them. After the Chiefs were the only offense that just did not stop. And you could look at the offensive numbers for the Saints and say that the same is the case for them. They didn't stop them early, and then they didn't try to really stop them later. And so there was a lot of allowed yards that didn't matter much because of the position they were in. They need to be the more tight defense that they were the previous weeks, from weeks 2 through 6, and then take the offense up just another notch to where, okay, getting the production from DeAndre, but to get production, they were getting production from DeAndre, they were getting the running game. Now you need to add contributors in the passing game to then open that up and have that passing game look good.
Yeah, and they need to be able to take advantage of, like we said, like the Vikings, they allow a lot of yardage. They just don't allow a ton of points. And so are you going to be able to take advantage of getting into position to make plays? Or are you going to be the team that struggled to score points? And that's what it comes down to. And it's crazy to see that, right? That the Cardinals are playing against a team that basically allows exactly what they've done fairly well for the year, to move the ball. They allow it to happen, but they also do a really good job of stopping them from scoring, which is what the Cardinals have struggled to do once they get to those positions. So it's now on the Cardinals to make sure it gets to, they're able to finish and put themselves in a position to win the game. Because that's at the end of the day, that's where the struggle or the disbelief in the Cardinals comes in, is that they just haven't been productive enough for you to be comfortable with saying like, oh, this team's good offensively, because even though they're putting up those yardage, they're not scoring points. And at the end of the day, like, points are, as juvenile and basic as it sounds, points are what matters. Like, you can be 10th or whatever they are in yardage, but like if you're 15th in points, then you're just not finishing. And that's the biggest thing. And you look at it, they're 15th in yardage, 15th in points. Like, they're average. They've been average. And that's the funny thing, is because we look at it and they're like, man, they've been really bad, right? But they're literally just league average. And that's what it's going to take for them to get above that, is that they're going to have to start putting the board and taking that next step.
What do you see this game coming down to? How do you think the Cardinals are going to pick up a win? Do you think that'll be close? Do you think that they're going to fall on their butt again?
Yeah, and I think they're going to come out. I think they're playing with a different mindset now that DeAndre's back, and I don't know if that's DeAndre. I don't know if that's the comfort level. I think they're going to come out and they're going to play well this week, and you're going to see a team that plays with a little more hair on fire, so to speak, because they know if they get behind early, that this Minnesota team is a tough team to come from behind against, and they flourish in that, pinning their ears back, getting pressure and creating havoc. So I think the Cardinals are able to kind of continue to build on what you saw last week, and I think that they make it 2 in a row. They get back to 500 and they win this one.
And this will be the first time that they've beaten the Vikings in Minnesota since 1977. That's a year that Seth does not even know exists. I do. I was a baby when the Cardinals last beat the Vikings in Minnesota. But I think the Cardinals also come out. I think they're going to build on their win last week. We're going to see improvements offensively, and I think we're going to see them be able to pull this out. The Cardinals and Vikings tend to play a lot of close games, and I think this will be close. Cardinals 27, Vikings 23. But this will be one of their first, especially with the wins that they've gotten, this will be their first, hey, maybe the Cardinals have something, because when you look at it, their win over the Raiders now doesn't look that impressive because Raiders are bad. The Panthers are bad. and New Orleans was a mess. So if they get a win this week, this will begin to legitimize in terms of what you think they are capable of moving forward.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we're at with this team right now, right?
Yep.
It's literally a week-to-week proposition, because after the nightmare of Seattle, you're like, well, I don't have any expectations for this New Orleans game, and then they somehow come out and put up the most points in Cliff Kingsbury's tenure, and you're like, okay, now I don't even know what to think of this team. Like, I literally have no idea where this is going to go. I'm just riding this wave 1 week at a time, and you're trying to make the best guess you can, and then take in the new information as you get it to make a more educated guess the next week.
Exactly. And with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up C Red Podcast, episode 378. We will be back again next week, hoping to talk about a 4-4 Cardinals team getting ready to avenge their loss to the Seattle Seahawks and maybe get a winning streak at home, and maybe string a few wins together to get them into contention. That's kind of what we want to see in the next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week on the Rise Up C Red Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C Red Podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up, Sea Red.